I am building all of Breath of the Wild in Minecraft, and after nearly 3 years, we have finally reached the end. We've managed to complete a massive portion of the map over the last 7 episodes, but after today, the entire map will be complete. We're first going to start with the Woodland Tower, working our way up into the Lost Woods and Corok Forest. After finishing Tyo Ruins a little further to the north, we'll head back down to the Great Plateau and move up through central Hyrule, where we'll finally build the highly anticipated Hyrule Castle. I know what you're probably asking, where is the world download for this? Well, sometime before Christmas, I will be posting one last grand finale episode, and when that video drops, I will release the world download for free. The first thing we have to do today is knock out this area to the north so that we can focus on central Hyrule. But before I could build the Lost Woods, I needed to finish the Woodland Tower and military training camp just outside the forest. After adding in some trees and the nearby stable, we were ready to start work on the ruins of the training camp. I added in the Sheikah Tower and began to outline all of the wood structures with the help of Goat and Sly. I thought outlining the entire training camp would be a massive pain, but it ended up not being too bad, and we finished decently fast. And yes, I did add the Broken Skull camp on top of the tower. Once we had everything outlined, I ran through the area to put in the final touches, coloring the rocks correctly and adding some texture variation to the different ruins. To my surprise, with this training camp done, pretty much the only other thing in this area was the Lost Woods. For the Great Hyrule Forest, I decided that it would be better to work on the inside first and build my way outwards. Basically, I thought it would be easier to build the Deku Tree and Corok Forest if I didn't have the massive Lost Woods in the way. Which means that the first task we have to tackle is the Deku Tree. Getting the shape and size of the tree to look right took quite a bit of time, but I eventually got it down by using the base of a massive cone, a technique that I really didn't think was going to work. Once I got the shape of the trunk down, I began to add in all of the roots around the bottom, which helped make it look more like a tree instead of a massive Coca-Cola can. Once that was finished, the only main part of the tree structure that was left were the branches up top, which went pretty smoothly thanks to Axiom. I added 2 layers of branches, with the upper ones reaching higher up to fill out the canopy more. But before I actually added in any leaves, we still had to add the Deku Tree's face. It took a lot of time to figure out how to make the face look good, but after a complete restart and taking a lot of time to tinker with the smallest details, it ended up looking alright. And with the face complete, I finally began to add all of the leaves to the branches, taking some time to test out different colors, ultimately deciding on a very simple pink palette. Then, as Goat worked on the Master Sword pedestal below, Voxel and Sam helped add in all of the trees and details to the Corok Forest, and the whole thing ended up looking really nice. This awesome screenshot that Voxel got is one of my favorites from the entire map. With the Corok Forest complete though, I finally had to tackle the Lost Woods itself, which is something that I was greatly concerned about. Over the years, I've been frequently asked how I plan to add the fog around Corok Forest, but to be honest, I've never had a single good idea. Lots of people have suggested giving players blindness when they enter the forest, but I've never liked that idea because it's not something that you can actually see from outside the woods. I wanted the fog to be visible from a distance, just like Breath of the Wild. And that's when I got a pretty clever idea. The trees in the Lost Woods don't have any leaves, so what if I took my current tree designs and replaced the leaves with stained glass to give it a misty, foggy look? I was really happy with this concept, but after trying it, I immediately realized that it wouldn't work. I mean, it's certainly a nice touch for the forest, but it definitely needs something more to it. It's just not enough fog. So I turned to plan B. Let's just build a massive blanket of fog over the forest. I created a mold of the forest floor and moved it up into the sky above, coloring it with stained glass and a bit of wool as well. This would work as a prototype, but I would come back to it the next day on stream to work with it more, and it ended up looking a lot better. Hazuki also made me a custom Lost Woods biome to add to the map, which made the foliage more of a grayish blue and added some nice particles as well. Unfortunately, these particles kind of make the replay mod footage unwatchable, but there wasn't much more left to do anyways. Goat took the time to build a few of the old trees with the creepy faces, which we added around the woods, and after adding the Corok shrine paths, the Lost Woods were complete. But speaking of these shrines, another question that I've constantly been asked is whether or not I'm going to be building the shrine interiors. But since the start of the project, I've always said no. I have never had any intention to make them. But then, about a year ago, I saw this guy in my Discord server who started building the Magnesis shrine interior, and I was like, hey, that's pretty cool. But then he built another shrine, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Hey, if you're building all the shrine interiors, do you want to just add them to my map? Sure. After a year of working on the shrine interiors, he has officially completed every single one. Sam will be making his own video about how he built the shrine interiors, so be sure to check him out in the description below. But anyways, the only build remaining in Northern Hyrule were the Tyo Ruins, which I knew that I could make quick work of. For the black fog surrounding the island, I did something similar to the Corok forest fog by making a massive dome with a mix of blocks like tinted glass, which block all light from going through. I moved the dome away to work on the ruins themselves, which were pretty much just reused assets from the Zonai ruins in Faerun. I finished up the final details and re-implemented the fog, which did work to make the whole area dark. But with that, the Woodland region was complete. Just one more tower region to go. Over the course of the last 3 years, Hyrule Field always felt like a far-fetched goal. And now that I was actually here, it felt surreal. But my motivation was at an all-time high. I was ready to completely tear through Central Hyrule and finally finish the build that I was most excited for, Hyrule Castle. My plan to tackle Hyrule Castle was simple. First, I would... What? Hold on. Why did this part just turn red? Wait, I never finished Lanayru Sea? How did I never complete that? And wait, hold on. I thought I built this area. Oh, God, and that reminds me, I still have to add all the islands to Lake Hylia. Jeez, and I never did most of the southern coast either, did I? Why did I not do that? How did that slip by me? And I have to add every Hinox, Talus, and Liner to the map. I should definitely go through all the scaffolding areas and re-implement the grass too. I forgot how we designed this. Okay, maybe there's a lot more work to be done than I thought there was. Over the course of the project, I would sometimes come across builds that seemed way too hard to build, so I just never did them. All of these little things have stacked up, and now, here they all are at the end of the project, still waiting to be finished. It sounds really bad that I left all of this hard stuff to be done right at the end, but in reality, I think I was actually smart to do so. I started this project with zero creative mode building experience, but after 3 years of this, I've become more skilled, more knowledgeable. Tasks that seemed impossible way back in the day, now they felt like child's play. Instead of spending hours working on these tasks when I was inexperienced, now I could rip through all of them with ease. And with the end of the project being just a few weeks away, my motivation was higher than it ever had been. Despite being really close to achieving incredible things in some of my other favorite games, I decided to drop everything and solely focus on building the map. Hanging out with friends and touching grass? Nah, that could be put on hold. I buckled myself in for the final push, because I was just a single month away from finishing the map. It was time for the great cleanup of Hyrule, and after that, just one task would remain. This was the true beginning of the end. Let's get started. A lot of the terrain in the earlier parts of the map is super ugly, as most of it just has grass as the top block across the whole surface. But since those early days, I've learned how to paint using specific angles, so I swept over all of Hyrule to fix all of the ugly old cliffs, making them look way better. I also noticed that the lakes and rivers of Hyrule looked really dead, so I came up with a palette to give some life to the water, meaning I had to sweep across Hyrule 3 more times in order to paint every source of water. I even painted the entirety of the ocean around Hyrule's edge. With a lot of the general cleanup work done, I turned my eyes to Gerudo. Remember back in episode 5 when I used this really ugly color for the Highlands and nobody liked it? Well, I didn't either. It's time to finally fix the Gerudo Cliffs. After testing out tons of different ideas for the cliffs, I eventually settled on a darker brown for the cliffside with a lighter yellow on the top. Now, moving across to the other side of the map, I mentioned in my last video that I didn't really like the Death Mountain smoke, so I was here to remake it. I scrapped the old design and started from scratch, aiming to make it much smaller. But that's pretty much about all that I changed in this first design, so I still wasn't happy with this one either. I scrapped it again and started my third attempt, making the new design funnel out a lot more near the top. I was also able to achieve a much more smoky look with this design as opposed to the solidness of the old one. So this was the design that I decided to settle on, a huge upgrade from the old one. There was still a ton of cleanup work that we just don't have time to go over today, but for the most part, I showed you guys the most important bits. And finally, the area outside of Central Hyrule was officially 100% complete. Around this time, I looked back to the very first episode of the series, and listened to the words that I chose to end the video with. I really want to do Hyrule Castle, but I feel like that should be saved for more of a climactic finish to the whole project. But one thing is for sure, we'll get to it eventually. Back then, most people seemed to think that this map would never be complete. This project was so crazy, there's no way I would ever follow through with it. We would never reach eventually. But the doubt that I received never did anything except fuel my desire to finish the map. The hatred that I felt towards the very idea of giving up this project was only reinforced by the doubt. And for those who stuck around for the journey, those who believed we would reach the end, this is our payoff. We've made it to eventually. Moving out from the Great Plateau, I finished up the nearby lake, which didn't have much apart from some ruins and enemy camps. But there was also this wooden tower nearby that I had somehow never built. Apart from some other small ruins closer to the Colosseum, alongside more camps and a shrine, the only other location in this area was Central Tower. And as I placed it in, I realized that this was the final Sheikah Tower on the entire map. There were some ruins along the base of the tower, and even more a little ways away, alongside a bunch of guardians that were swarming the area. Just to the west was the ancient tree stump, which went pretty fast and ended up looking pretty good. There were also the Sage Temple ruins a little further north, but they were mostly just reused assets. And after finishing this bridge further north, and the ruins that went with it, Western Central Hyrule was complete. Moving back down south, I finished adding in the final stable on the entire map, which went pretty fast, before moving on to the bottomless swamp. There was a decent bit of terrain work and some pools of malice to add, and once those were in place, I moved on to the giant skull. I started with a sphere and began to carve out the details of the skull, which did take some time to get right before rotating it and putting it into place. Apart from that, the eastern fields are mostly empty. There was the Lon Lon Ranch ruins, as well as Mabe Village, but they were mostly reused assets. After adding in the final bridges in the area and placing all of the guardians swarming the region, Central Hyrule was finished. With that, it was just the castle town, and the two islands flanking the castle. After finishing up the Sacred Ground ruins, I started by outlining where all of the paths would go in Castletown. The terrain was also quite a mess and required lots of cleanup. Once that was out of the way, I began placing the outer walls of the town around the outside, which didn't take too long thanks to Axiom's shape tool. Goat whipped up a pretty nice design for the walls, which I then began to extend across their entire length. It was a pretty time-consuming process, but it was nice to get it out of the way now. The walls also had some towers dotted around that I also built up, as well as the main entrance gatehouse, which turned out pretty nice. Finally moving into the town itself, there was a lot of work to be done. I decided to build the large center fountain first, which was a ton of fun to make, before starting to outline every ruin structure and pool of malice throughout the town. It seemed like a very daunting task until I realized that most of the buildings in the town are identical, meaning I just had to build a few and copy and paste them around. Sam joined me to build some of the structures, and with his help, we finished the first two designs pretty quickly. As I was pasting those designs around the town, Sam finished up a few more designs in the area, including the broken watchtower. After we had finished a few different buildings, I was able to almost completely fill up the town, apart from a few one-off designs on the eastern side of the town, which Sam took care of for me. The Castletown also has a very gray, burnt grass color, but instead of using a custom biome for this, I used a mix of mycelium and other gray blocks to get a burnt texture, and I think it turned out really well. And finally, after Sam finished up the last designs in the town, I ran through and added the guardians dotted around town, before also adding a bunch of large spikes to the malice pools, completing the Castletown. Despite the fact that it was 3 a.m. at this point, I really wanted to knock out the 2 islands right now so that I could start on the castle on the next day. So I first tackled the western island, which only had some duplicated walls and small ruins, as well as a talus and guardian. The other island did have a new bridge design that I had to build, but apart from that, it was only very minuscule ruins and 2 guardians here. Hyrule Castle. The build that I've been looking forward to more than any other. Despite my excitement, it was bittersweet knowing that this was the final build of the project. Even still, I was eager to finally put this project behind me. After cleaning up the terrain of the castle a bit, I decided the best way forward was to outline every structure on the entire castle before doing any design work. So, using Axiom's shape tool, I began at the gatehouse and started making my way up the hill. As I got up past the first gatehouse, it became apparent that there was lots of terraforming to be done as well, as there were missing bridges, overhangs, and much more. After wrapping around the backside of the castle, where there weren't as many structures, I had made my way all the way around to Zelda's study, and with some final fixes to the terrain, the sanctum was the final part of the castle to outline. But what I hadn't realized until I started working on the sanctum was that this was the single most complicated piece of architecture across all of Hyrule. Yes, even more so than the entirety of Zora's domain. It took so much time to edit and work with the sanctum that the replay file of the whole building session became so long and massive that I literally cannot render the footage from my computer. Luckily, I still have the stream VOD of the build, in which you can see how tired and defeated I was. But after 3 straight hours of working on nothing except the sanctum's outline, it was finished. Afterwards, I took some time to do final terraforming to the island and added in all of the waterways flowing down the mountain, completing the outline for Hyrule Castle. Now it was time to actually design the structures that I had outlined. Toby and I started with the gatehouse entrance into the castle, for which I realized that tough blocks were going to be a huge help with this build. After the gate was finished, I completed the building on the hill that Goat had already been working on, a structure that would repeat a lot throughout the castle walls. There was also another larger structure nearby that I whipped up as well. Moving along the island to the east, I wanted to finish up all of the copy-pasted castle walls surrounding the island, and that was pretty much all that was here on this side of the castle. Looping around to Zelda's room, there were literally no unique structures along the backside of the island. There were the 2 gatehouses near the front of the castle, for which Toby joined me once more to build them up. The gatehouse was an incredibly fun build, but our design here did come out a little large, so I would end up having to shorten this a bit. We also added a bit of dark prismarine into the palette as a darker contrast alongside the tuff. The other gatehouse was almost the exact same design, we just had to rotate it onto the correct angle. One of the only remaining builds left was Zelda's study, which ended up being harder than I expected it to. I really did not like this first design that I had made, and I couldn't quite put my finger on exactly what it was. Despite most of my chat telling me that it was fine, I still could not accept it. Looking back, I think it was because each layer was smoothly connected together instead of being distinctly separated. So, after the stream, I completely restarted on the tower. And I'm glad that I did, because despite having to take some creative liberties with the design, this one turned out much better. I then fixed up Zelda's room itself across the valley, which did take some tinkering with the terrain to fit properly, before connecting the 2 up with the bridge. With Zelda's room and study complete, the sanctum was the only part of the castle left that I had to design. I quickly finished up the triangular roof above the entrances, but Mako pointed out that the triangle structure was incorrect and would come in to fix it for me. Meanwhile, I continued designing the bottom layers and smaller towers nearby, which didn't turn out to be too hard. Moving up to the second layer, I had to design some more towers, which for some reason gave me so much trouble. I don't know why these towers were making me struggle so much at the time. But after identifying its flaws, I was finally able to find a design that I was happy with. At this point, only the center tower of the sanctum remained, which luckily went a bit easier than the previous towers. The design translated to Minecraft quite well, and its larger size allowed me to detail more easily. There were also a few smaller towers flanking the center one. Once the tower was complete, I put it into its proper location in the sanctum and duplicated the symmetrical design across all 4 corners, completing the sanctum after a 3-hour session. There was still some work to be done to the exterior of the castle though. There was some grass and foliage on the island, but the green is just way too bright. So Hazuki would once again cook up a custom biome for Hyrule Castle to give us some nice particles and grass color. It even makes the sky turn into a red-orangish color when you approach the sanctum, just like in Breath of the Wild. I also finally got to implement my Guardian Sentry design that I made over 2 years ago, as I placed in all of the Guardians around the castle. I also changed the stone cliff color to something darker to make the castle stand out a bit more. And once some trees and final touches were in place, I added in all of the malice pools around the castle to complete the exterior. I did still need to make the 5 pillars around the castle, but I wanted to do those later. The interior is like a giant sprawling labyrinth, and it's really hard to properly show the building process with replay mod. But I did finish it all after almost 20 hours of work. Some of the more notable rooms are the library, Zelda's study, and the docks. Sly, Goat, and Toby helped out a ton with the different interior rooms. You'll be able to see it all more clearly yourself in the world download. We saved the interior of the sanctum for last, which was super complex and had a ton of work to be done. As Voxel and I worked on the main floor, Mako designed the Ganon cocoon, while Sly and Sam worked on the upper layers of the sanctum. But down below this area, I also wanted to build the Ganon boss arena. Ombrains had already come down here to design Calamity Ganon himself as we worked on the sanctum, which turned out incredible. Once I'd finished the sanctum, I joined her down here to design the room itself, which surprisingly went super smoothly since my first idea for a wall design worked beautifully. And once the floor design was done, the interior of the castle was finished. Moving back outside, I wanted to add the giant pillars around the castle, but due to an unfortunate internet crash, the footage of this build is lost to time. I've seen many people build Hyrule Castle over the years, so a while back I was thinking of ways to make my Hyrule Castle stand out from the rest. And that's when I realized that nobody else had ever made the swirling swine himself, Calamity Ganon. To start, I wanted to add in the swirling strands of malice circling the castle, which I was able to find a good method for after a lot of testing. That took care of most of Calamity Ganon's malice cloud. Building the head of Ganon itself was quite the tricky task, and I really didn't know if this idea was going to work. But after getting a general shape down and adding the horns and teeth, it was starting to come together. After adding in the eyes, I was suddenly much more happy with it. But in hindsight, I realized this still needed work. For one thing, the malice is supposed to expand outwards from the head, not shrink down like I had made mine. So I came back later to fix that, and it looked a lot better. I also worked on the structure of the head just a tad bit more because I felt like the shape of the mouth almost made him look happy. And now I'm much more okay with how this Ganon design turned out. To officially conclude the build, the final thing to add was the Triforce inside of the Sanctum. After putting in the structure for it, all builders who were present online had a turn to add to the Golden Triforce. And with the final blocks of the golden symbol in place, the Breath of the Wild in Minecraft project was complete. While it does feel surreal to say that the project is complete, we still have one more video to go in just a couple weeks. The grand finale will cover the entire project in one super episode, telling parts of the story that you guys have never heard before. And in this grand finale, we will get a look at the entire map loaded in with shaders. With all of that out of the way, I will see you guys in the grand finale.